people talk about the issues around mental health and loneliness. And I wanted to say something that isn't said often enough, is that the desire to belong, the need to belong, the psychological need to be included means that young people who are lonely are incredibly vulnerable to exploitation by other people.
Welcome to Rethinking Education. Education's critical friend.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Rethinking Education podcast. My name is James Mannion.
And mine is David Cameron.
Indeed, and it is very lovely to see you, David. It's been a little while. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. And yourself?
I am just A-okay. Yeah, I'm very, I'm feeling good. I almost sung then. I'm gonna restrain myself from singing. So we've just recorded this fascinating conversation with Sue Roffey. Give us a little taster, a little teaser for our listeners to invite them into this conversation. What are your takeaways from this conversation with Sue?
Let's make the exceptions the norm. Sue's absolutely brilliant at highlighting good practice, not only here, but worldwide. And I think the challenge that we gave her today was to help us see how we make that the norm, because so many things in the system are inimical to the practices she's talking about. And I'm certainly going to make an effort to be much more subversive, much more ambitious, and even more challenging than I've been up until now. So Sue Roffey's got a lot to answer for, James.
Beautiful. And how are you, sir? What's been going on at your end?
I've been having a really interesting week. I had a wonderful podcast that I'm just hoping that I can now recover with Fiona Miller, Richard Buston, and Michael Fullan.
Oh, so, man, I've got guest envy. What is all this Michael Fullan and Fiona Miller business?
Yeah,
well, we've had Richard. I don't mean to exclude Richard there. Richard was on our pod recently.
Hey? Yeah. But I mean, this is my whole raison d'etre for podcasts, and I just want to meet people that I'm impressed by.
Yeah, I've cracked it. It's the best thing about podcasting. If you phoned up Michael Fullan and you'd be like, "Can I have a conversation?" He's probably like, "No, I'm a bit busy." But if you're like, "It is a podcast," and they go, "Oh, okay then," and people, all these people just give you their time for free. It's amazing. It's the best thing ever.
Absolutely. And it was a great conversation. So a few technical issues I need to sort out. And I'm very excited, James, just to keep the social note going. I'm going off to London this weekend to see David Byrne.
Are you now?
Yeah. So wildly excited.
Right. I'm off to see some avant-garde jazz this evening. I can't remember the guy's name, but it looks really good. And there's some guy who's got a Radio 3 show, but he's doing a gig in a local pub here. So I was thinking of you. I will report back.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. I look forward to it.
And
I really look forward to this week's episode with Sue Roffey.
Nicely done. Hope you enjoy the show, everybody. Sue Roffey. This one's been a long time in the making. Here we are. We made it at last.
It's so good to be here, James. Thank you.
Welcome indeed to the Rethinking Education podcast. Thank you for having us. Thank you for having us. That doesn't even make sense, does it? Thank you for what's the opposite of being had? What do you say? Thank you for turning up.
Being here will do.
Thank you for being here. Was that a film? Being Here is a film, isn't it? Is that Peter Sellers?
Being There, I think.
Is that Being There? That's some movie, that one.
I'm glad this is being edited. Go on.
We're off to a roaring start. So I know quite a lot about you, Sue, although I have just learned that you spent a big chunk of your life in Australia, which I didn't previously know. But for the benefit of anybody who is not yet familiar with you and your work, could you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do and what has led you to this point?
Okay. I think that all of the things that I've done are sort of dovetail into the place I'm at now, which is really nice. I was a teacher for quite a long time, mostly working with young people with emotional, behavioural, social difficulties, and in a way that's given me a real level of heart and compassion for the disadvantaged, because those kids were really struggling with things that they were dealing with. I then did a couple of masters, became an educational psychologist, did that for a number of years, ended up as a principal psychologist, and then went to Australia where I became an academic. Really, I suppose for the last decade or more, I've been working much more independently. Although I have an honorary associate professorship at UCL, which they very kindly let me have. I am not employed by them. It's an honorary position, and I write. I mean, a lot of the things that I've been doing over the last few years have been developing a way of approaching a revisioning of education, very largely to do with the Aspire principles. A lot of people, when they're talking about well-being in education, if they're not doing an either or, well-being or learning, and I think they're both intimately interlinked, they often address the separate issues. So it's teacher well-being, it's leadership, it's the interventions. And the Aspire principles that I've been developing now over quite a long time are the principles that underpin all of those things. And if they're all in place, then they're much more likely to be successful. I mean, I also see myself as an advocate for social justice, which is a very strong thread through all the things that I do.
Okay, thank you for that. And so, were you going to come in there, David?
Yeah, I was just going to say you're in the right place. We're quite fond of a bit of social justice ourselves. So
I know.
So
I mean,
that's a welcome from me too. And could I just say that I'm sitting here for anybody that's only doing this in audio, turning green with envy. I do not know how you managed to crack all of that. I just did a couple of doctorates, and then I became a principal psychologist, and then I went to Australia, and I became an academic. I love all that. That's great stuff. You are living my life, Sue. So, yeah, thank you.
well, I'm an old lady now. I fitted a lot in. But I'm not stopping. I mean, basically, I'm as busy as I've ever been, which is lovely.
Excellent.
I'm really pleased that that's how it is.
You certainly do seem busy. You travel a lot. You publish. You write such a lot. I remember you saying last year. You said it was about sort of this time last year, and you were like, "I've got to write 2 books by the summer," and I was
Yes.
just thinking, it's just taken me 10 years to write one. And it's, as far as I can gather, you hit that deadline. You are prolific in your writing. So let's just dive into. I was going to ask you about your publications. You mentioned the Aspire model there, and we'll perhaps sort of dive into that later on. But just give us a picture of just like some examples, because you shared some really interesting examples of other types of publications recently. So, what have you been writing about of late?
Well, I mean, I've written quite a lot over the years on issues to do with behaviour. And that's very much about fostering a relational approach to behaviour and strengths-based thinking and all the rest of it. So I'm not in agreement with some of the behaviour gurus that certainly the last government have, and I don't think they've got really at the moment had anybody to replace those really well, although I think it's happening. I've also joined in with 6 colleagues to write Creating the World We Want to Live In, How Positive Psychology Can Build a Brighter Future. That was published in 2021. I've written on social emotional learning. I'm often asked to write chapters for books. And I've had to sort of limit that a bit because it can become a bit overwhelming. 2 years ago, I was asked by a big academic publisher whether I'd be prepared to consider editing the Handbook of Wellbeing in Education. And I have been doing that for basically pretty much the last 2 years with my colleague, Professor Anzi Kitchen in South Africa. And it's been a real labour of love. We have got 32 chapters, each of which has been read, reviewed, edited, copy edited, and we're now almost at the point of actually having finalized that. But I think it's been really important because it's addressing well-being across many dimensions, but also looking at how all the Aspire principles actually dovetail with that. And the other thing I've been doing is the Love of Learning project, which it's been extremely excited about. In June last year, the All-Party Parliamentary Group in Education published a document called An Inquiry into the Loss of Love of Learning. And it talks about the things that James and I have been talking about in the Education Policy Alliance for ages, about kids not wanting to go to school, kids being bored when they're there, teacher attrition, being hard to hold on to good teachers, people keeping their kids at home. I mean, a whole load of not very good things. So I was talking to a colleague of mine, friend of mine, someone I've known for a long time, who was a secondary school teacher. And he said, I'm a governor of a primary school down here in Southampton, and they're doing wonderful things. And I said, well, people should know about the wonderful things they're doing. I'm sure there's lots of really great schools around doing really good things for kids. And, well, to cut a long story short, we have been doing a deep dive into schools all around the country. We originally decided we'd do 12. We cut that down to 10 so I could do it in this academic year. We've done 5. The 6th one is next week. And we've talked to everybody in the school. We spent 2 days there doing observations, talking to kids, talking to parents, talking with teachers, talking with the leadership. And it has been absolutely inspirational. And we've written up each school the week after we visited, 6,000-word chapter, while it's still fresh in our minds. And I have just asked for a 3-month extension on the other book that I'm supposed to be doing, which is on a book on behaviour for parents, which is a joint Routledge British Psychological Society project. And that was due in at the same time as the handbook, and it's now going to be written through the summer. And I've written probably about half of it already, but I haven't got round to finishing it. So I've been spending quite a lot of my time in an intimate relationship with my laptop. But having been going to these schools and actually meeting with like minds has been so uplifting. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, you know?
Can I come in on that, Sue? Because
Yeah.
there's a really fascinating echo for me. I've been involved now for some time in producing an online course on trauma-informed practice.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we've done in that is to do what we've called cross sections through schools.
Mm-hmm.
So we've done 2 primaries, we've done a secondary, so not on the same scale, but very much the same approach. And I guess that gives rise to a couple of questions for me. I mean, one, I think, is that this is clearly becoming a really crowded field in terms of writing and thinking. So I guess the first part of the question is, what is it that marks your work out as being different within that particularly crowded field? And then the second part, I think, is to ask you to maybe take us into how that's reflected in these worked examples of schools that you're referring to.
Well, I mean, in terms of the first question, I think that one of the things that has sort of separated my thinking and my approach out from others, although I think there's a lot of other people who are coming around to this way of thinking, is that one, I'm not that interested in taking problems to pieces, because I think when you do a deep dive into problems, which is what people often do, what you get left is a segmented problem. I'm very interested in looking at where do we need to be? What's the vision? What's the way forward? Because if you don't have a vision in mind, then it's very hard to know which steps to take in which direction. So it's very much positive focus. It is also not, although individuals really matter, a lot of the work that I do is very much about what's good for us, not what's good for me. And I think quite a lot of the positive psychology criticism has been about how much they're focused on personal happiness. And I don't think I'm that interested in personal happiness, really. I'm interested in how we support each other, how we enable each other to become the best of ourselves. So I think that that is one of the things that sort of separates me out. The other is that I'm not doing a siloed approach to things. I'm taking quite a big picture view of what we need to do and actually looking at the Aspire just threads through everything, really, because it's what makes things happen in the way that we really want them to happen. And I guess as well, you know, along with the social justice stuff, is that you see what's happening in the world today, and I'm horrified and sickened by it. But I hold on to the fact that there's a lot of people out there who are really focused on what education needs to be about, in terms not only of enabling young people to become the best of themselves, whatever that is, you know, success isn't the same for everybody, but also education should be about what world we're developing. I mean, in 1996, Jacques Delors wrote his report for UNESCO, which was about education in the 21st century. And he talked about the 4 pillars of education: learning to know, learning to do, which has very much been the focus of the curriculum all over the place, but also learning to be and learning to live together. And I think that a lot of the stuff that I've done has been very much focused on those 2 pillars of education and how we desperately need them in our world today.
And where are you seeing that in practice then?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of schools. I mean, we chose these 10 because they were in some ways recommended to us, you know, these primary schools. But we also know, I mean, in the Aspire books, I went around the world asking for people that I knew to give little case studies of things. So there's a lot of people around taking these things on board. I worked in China for a number of years, most of it online, because the first time they asked me, it was during COVID. But I went October 24, I think it was, and spent 3 weeks visiting the bilingual schools that I've been involved with. And it was just extraordinary to see some of the things that I'd written about on the walls of these schools in China, you know, and it just always surprises me, you know, especially when, you know, you have this intimate relationship with your computer, that some of the things you've said and you've written actually are beginning to have traction here, there, and everywhere. And we know that there are a number of international schools. Somebody showed me around their school in China, a different school than the ones I've been working in, and said, Aspire is in place all around this school, you know, and we give kids agency. The OECD, I'm on the expert group for agency on the OEC. I think it's called reimagining education, reimagining children or childhood. I've forgotten what it's called, but it's been to do very much with agency and giving kids agency. But you also need to give teachers agency as well. This is not one or the other. It has to be both. And in all of the schools that we've been visiting, teachers are all saying, we feel respected here, we have choices here, we feel cared for here, we don't want to leave. I mean, it has just been amazing to see some of these things actually in practice. And I mean, I've just been invited to go and do a symposium in Sao Paulo in Brazil, because there's a group of bilingual schools there who are also looking at what they want, what well-being means to them. And of course, the first thing I'll say is that well-being and learning are not dichotomies. They're not 2 ends of a spectrum. They're utterly intertwined, which I'm sure James would agree with.
Yeah, I certainly would. So you've mentioned this Aspire model a few
Yeah.
times, and you referred to the Aspire books, plural. And so it's a big topic, this, isn't it? So the Aspire is an acronym, and it stands for, so there's 6 things. We've got agency, safety, positivity, inclusion, respect, equity. What's the best way into this, do you think, for listeners? What would be a good way? I mean, it might be to continue sort of like perhaps to take one in turn and look at some practical examples of what that looks like in practice, and maybe some non-examples, which is often I find really helpful. What's the opposite of agency look like in schools? What's the opposite of safety look like, and so on? What do you think?
Oh, I think, I think it's probably worth going through each of them and fairly briefly, maybe the bullet points about them, because I've written quite extensively about all of them, as have other people. I mean, self-determination theory, we know, because of the work of Ryan and Detche. I mean, all the stuff that I do is based in lots and lots of evidence. Says that well-being actually exists in our ability to have some control over our lives, being able to have a say, being able to participate. And when it doesn't happen in education, people sit and they're taught at, not with. It's about something being delivered to them rather than with them. We underestimate children and young people a lot. I think a lot of people do. And they've got ideas, they've got curiosity, they want to make a difference. And those schools that are actually enhancing student agency by giving them opportunities to make that difference in one way or another. And I can make a whole list of the different ways that schools are doing that. And I'm very aware that the project that we're doing at the moment is focused on primary. And we really need to do something very similar in the secondary sector as well.
Yeah, well, there's been a graph doing the rounds recently, hasn't there, about like children's and young people's enjoyment of school, and it just falls off a cliff when they get to secondary. Like,
oh yeah, absolutely,
something very wrong in the secondary sector.
And safety is digital, psychological, physical, everything. There's a positive psychologist called Barbara Fredrickson who has made it fairly clear that positive emotions actually facilitate our cognitive pathways. They enable us to learn. So if we're actually full of anxiety or hypervigilance or depression, it's much harder for us to concentrate, focus, and learn. So safety is really important in schools. And one of the big things I think it's worth saying about safety is that kids need to know that making mistakes is a step on the pathway to learning. Making mistakes is important. Everybody needs to know that that's okay. I could talk about bullying as well, because we know how many kids feel that they're bullied at school. And yet the only way of really addressing that is for kids themselves to make decisions about the culture of their class and the culture of their school. And when they do it together, and I think if you're doing social and emotional learning in a way that is safe and strengths-based and solution-focused for everybody, then that will happen. And I've seen it happen in schools where, people will say, we don't do that. That's not what we do here.
Yeah.
In the school I've just visited, one of the kids said to me, we don't have violence or stealing or anything like that in this school. And this is a seriously disadvantaged school. Amazing.
And so you're talking about providing the children with the time and space in order to do this. When you sort of said, oh, like bullying stops when children take responsibility for the culture, it almost that might, I know this is not what you mean, but that some people might interpret that as it's up to the kids to sort this out, and that's obviously not what you're saying. So what does that look like in practice, doing this work with the young people?
I'll talk to you a little bit about one of the things I've developed in social and emotional learning. One of the books I've written is called Circle Solutions for Student Wellbeing, and the third edition was published in 2020. And quite a long time ago, the social and emotional learning in schools was dismissed, really, because it wasn't having the impact that people wanted it to have, particularly in secondary. And I had some sympathy with that view because I don't think that people ever thought about the how to do it well. So in the social emotional learning that I do, you do things like, I was just an example, is that you mix kids up so they're not sitting next to the same people they always sit next to. So they get to know other people. So that's a start, right? It's harder to bully someone when you've actually had conversations about what you've got in common. I mean, that's a simple thing. And then you get them to discuss things like hypotheticals. So you get them into groups of 4 or 5, and you get them to, you have a hypothetical such as, Timmy comes to school and he has been born with a red mark across his face. And people are quite unkind to him about this. You know, they say, here comes the traffic light, right? So you get kids to understand and talk to each other is, first of all, is it his fault that he has a red mark on his face? Right, so they're talking about that together. And then they say, how do you think it makes him feel when people treat him like that? And then you say, what do you think he would want to happen? Yeah. Okay, so what can this class do to make sure that everybody feels okay, regardless of what they look like?
Yeah, they almost sound like sort of restorative type questions, just helping people to think this through. Okay, so we've touched upon agency and safety there. So positivity.
Okay, well, positivity sometimes gets a bad rap because, again, I've already said about it being focused on the individual happiness, but that actually really undermines some of the really important things about positive approaches. First of all, it's strengths-based. So, you know, we don't talk about kids in terms of deficits. We talk with them in terms of the way they are developing, who they are becoming, the strengths that they help them identify what their strengths are, right? It's about being solution focused. It's about not looking at what, you know, we've got a problem here, let's address the problem, but what do we want to happen? And again, you're right, James, a lot of this does dovetail with restorative practices. And I know that Mark Thorsburn and Joe Brummer, who've done a lot of work in restorative practices, are one of the authors for the Handbook of Wellbeing in Education. And their work is, I've huge respect for their work and for anybody who's doing restorative practices. But the other one is about play and the importance of play for kids. Now, I worked for a while with some Aboriginal girls in year 7 in Australia. And we did all sorts of things with them, including doing lots of games. And when they were given the opportunity to have some free time, what did they want to do? They wanted to play games, you know, collaborative, cooperative, fun games. And, you know, Tina Farr's school, which is one of our love of learning schools, we went and visited them. And the kids have agency, but they also have amazing opportunities to play. And the play helps them expand their learning. You know, it's just great. I think kids are naturally curious. And when their curiosity is enhanced in school, that aligns with healthy child development. When they're told that they can only write what the teacher tells them to write, it doesn't do their healthy development any good at all.
Yeah, really interesting. Now, there's a lovely video that we'll put in the show notes of that Tina's school was on the news a while ago because they start the school day just by playing music in the playground at drop off, and everyone's just dancing. This is the start to the day, and they play just like playing some like old school like dance classics, but also, you know, like celebrating different cultures through music, and it's just such a beautiful, joyful start to the day, and it's just such a no-brainer. When you see that, you think, why doesn't everybody do that? Like that's just a really easy thing to do.
Yeah, we joined in with that when we visited her school. It was lovely.
Amazing. I'm not going to ask you to throw any moves right now, Sue, but we
Oh,
are.
no, don't.
Okay, so that's positivity. Let's do inclusion.
Right. Okay. Well, one of the things that we now know that's essential to again psychological well-being is feeling that you belong, right? And I'm a huge fan of Professor Isaac Prelitensky. I don't know if you've ever come across Isaac Prelitensky's work.
No, who's that?
He's a professor in Miami, And he's done an enormous amount of work on the importance of mattering. And in fact, he's written he and his students have written 2 chapters for the Handbook of Wellbeing. One is about early years and one is about adolescents and older students. And mattering to him, and I completely agree, it's not just being valued for who you are, it's actually being able to participate and be of value, so
Yes.
that you feel that your presence is really important.
Yeah.
And I know that you wanted to follow up at one point about the chapter that I wrote about loneliness. And in some ways, this is aligned with issues of belonging, because I wrote a paper a long time ago now, but it feels very real at the moment, that inclusive belonging is about welcoming everybody, valuing diversity, actually accepting everybody for who they are and enabling them to become the best of themselves. And it is about our shared humanity, which for me is actually central to the work that I do.
Yeah.
Exclusive belonging is great at times, but not always, for those inside the group, but they maintain their sense of superiority by keeping others out. And one of the
Sorry,
problems
can you break
with
that down? What do you mean by exclusive belonging?
exclusive belonging is me and my gang, right?
Okay, got you. It's
It's
like
me and the people
in
who
group.
are like me, and
Right.
they're the people who fit. And if you don't wear the right clothes, have the right skin color, have the right sexuality, etc., you can't belong, and we'll keep you out. And one of the things that does, and we see it increasingly in some aspects of our society and world at the moment, is that exclusive belonging can lead to inhumanity and treating others as it rather than us.
Yeah, there's no shortage of that around.
No.
Thank you for that.
So inclusion for me is just one of the really, really important principles, that we all actually make each other feel that we matter and that we're valued.
Thank
And
you.
there's so many ways of doing that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So we've got ASPE so far. We've got R and E to go. Respect next.
Right, respect is quite a difficult thing to define a lot of the time, right? But it's respect for an individual, it's a respect for their ideas, it's respect for their communities and where they come from. It's about not putting people down. It's about listening well to what other people have to say rather than just dismissing them. There is in the Aspire books, I've actually written one of the aspects of respect that a lot of people accept, and it's respect is about treating people as we would like to be treated. And there are 21 major religions in the world who have one version of that statement or another. You know, do not harm other people in the way you would not want to be harmed. Treat other people as you want to be treated. And for me, that is the basis of respect. But it's also, I mean, I've seen it not happen. You've talked a little bit about giving examples of it not happening. I've seen it not happen in schools when I was working as an ed psych, where it was very clear who had the power, who had the say, who left people outside the door, who the language that was used. You know, you don't have the same language for everybody. And in one school I was at, she's a little anecdote I tell with glee, is that I was in a school talking about a 6-year-old, and the head teacher was on a desk, behind the desk, that was raised on a platform in her room. And the parent and the teacher and the ed psych, as in me, was sitting on comfy sofas down below, which spoke volumes about who had the power there and where the respect lie. And I think that is, you need to be really aware not only of what you're doing, but of what you are not doing. Look at the honour rolls in schools, written on the walls. Who is there? Who is excluded?
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, the way that the physics of just like how we arrange furniture and things is often overlooked, but often just like
All that stuff.
reinforces power dynamics. I'm going to have a whole episode on power soon. I think that there's
Oh,
something really
yeah,
there.
good idea. Good idea.
Okay, and equity, finally.
Well, equity is very much around schools being fair and flexible. It's very much along the lines of one size does not fit all. Trying to shoehorn kids into the same little box does so many of them an injustice. So for me, equity is very multi-layered. And I'll just give you an example of the promotion of equity in the school I visited last week. It is probably in one of the poorest areas of London, huge numbers of asylum seekers, refugees, people living in one room, not facilities for washing, having to share bathroom facilities, really, really tough. The school does wrap around care for everyone. They provide breakfast at 7:30. They have after-school activities until 6. They open they have two campuses. They open one of the buildings on Saturday, and actually not only have children got access to play and play equipment, but they've actually give parents access to cooking and washing facilities as well. And they try and put on classes for language, ESOL classes for parents to let them know what's going on in the school. So what is actually happening is the parents send their children to school for all the reasons that there are. And that school, which has probably 80% of its children speak a different language at home, possibly even more, got above average results in SATs last year. I mean, and that for me is equity in practice. It's actually looking at where you need to be flexible, where you need to be fair, what you can do with what you've got. It's not possible for everybody, but it actually starts with the courage and the commitment of school leaders, and then bringing everybody on board so that everybody feels that this matters and that they matter. I could rabbit on forever about this stuff.
Hello, Earthlings. This podcast is brought to you by Crown House Publishing. Crown House have published many of the most influential books of recent years, certainly many that have been the most influential on my own thinking. Things like When the Adults Change by Paul Dix, A Curriculum of Hope by Dr. Deborah Kidd, and The Wonderful Botheredness by Howell Roberts. They have also published an amazing card-based resource called Activate, a professional learning resource designed to help people develop their thinking and their practice around self-regulated learning, which is designed on my own doctoral research and which I created with my erstwhile colleagues at the Centre for Educational Leadership in the UCL Institute of Education. Anyway, as listeners to the podcast, or indeed viewers, you can receive a 20% discount on all titles from the Crown House website if you use the promo code REPOD20. That's REPOD20, all caps. That offer does exclude bundles and existing promotions, though. So head over to crownhouse.co.uk and treat yourself, or perhaps a colleague, or indeed 10 or 20. That's crownhouse.co.uk, REPOD20. Okay, let's get back to today's pod.
I mean, I'll just go back while we're at it to the loneliness chapter, if I may, because
I was going to ask you about that. So just to set the context. So you recently wrote this book chapter on the consequences of loneliness among young people, and it's interesting. It's not, as soon as I've read that, I just thought I've not heard anybody talking about that before. You often hear about loneliness among older people. Like that's the most common way that that's framed. So I've not really heard people talking about this before. So yes, please do set the context for that book chapter.
Well, I was asked to write it and I agreed because it's open access. So anybody can read it, which I thought was important. And I also wrote it because I thought that, first of all, there's quite a lot in the literature now about loneliness in young people and how profound that is for a number of young people, who don't have anywhere near as many supportive face-to-face friendships that they used to have. But it's also about people talk about the issues around mental health and loneliness. And I wanted to say something that isn't said often enough, is that the desire to belong, the need to belong, the psychological need to be included means that young people who are lonely are incredibly vulnerable to exploitation by other people, because they might be engaged in gangs, they might want to belong to a certain group. I wrote a chapter with a colleague, Christopher Boyle, on a book on belonging about the issues about radicalization and the fact that, when people feel that they don't belong in a healthy way to their school and their community, then they are much more again, I use the word vulnerable to exploitation by others. And I think that the other thing that happens is that there was a piece of work done by Wiki and Fraser, 2003. It's a long time ago now, but I think it's been replicated, about school shootings. And we know that they are perpetrated by people, often, not all of them, but often they've been perpetrated by people who've been rejected by others in school.
Right.
And that sense of rejection hits the same parts of the brain as physical pain. And I think that it's very, very difficult for somebody who is rejected, even if it's not rejection by someone they know, and that's bad enough, rejection by other people in a community where you would feel that you had a right to belong, is not only very painful, but it can lead to retributive action. And we've seen that happen. So that importance of belonging leads to things like we should not be having zero tolerance in schools. We should be actually trying our very best to include everybody in the best possible way that we can.
So let's just dive into this more, because some people might think, there's no shortage of young people in a school. It doesn't look like it's a place where you would be lonely. You think of loneliness as affecting old people, perhaps when their loved ones and friends have passed away, and it's harder to get out physically and so on. Like, can you talk about some of the causes of loneliness? Like, how would you frame this among young people?
I think it's really hard. I mean, one of the things that we know about adolescents, for instance, is that the framework for their values, the focus of their values changes from their families to their peers when they're young adolescents. So developing their identity when it's working in a healthy way means having discussions and activities and feeling supported by the people around you. And several things get in the way of that. One is when you have schools that don't accept everybody for who they are, so that and I think it happens a little bit in some American schools where the sports stars are lauded, and if you're academically brilliant, you're lauded. But if you don't belong to either of those, then somehow you're and you hear it from the president, you're a loser, right? And when you have that negative sense of self, it becomes even harder to develop healthy relationships with other people. But we can also facilitate those healthy relationships by actually doing really good quality social emotional learning, where kids have the opportunity to talk about things that really matter to them. I mean, one of the things we did in China, I ran some circles with some older kids, they're all speaking, they're bilingual schools, so they're all talking in English. And we got them to talk in pairs and in small groups about what's good about the internet, because there's lots that's good about it. Let's be upfront with this. What's difficult about the internet, and how do we keep ourselves safe, and how do we talk to each other about it? Because we know that cyberbullying has been horrendous. And kids need to have the opportunity to talk about what that means for them, so that it raises kids' ability to be aware of the impact that it has on other people and might have on them. And of course, when so much of life is lived online, I don't know about you, James, but I go and on London transport, and 90% of the people on transport are looking at their phones. And I think that in some ways has undermined. I think it's beginning to get better, but I think that has undermined the importance of developing face-to-face relationships, because it positions relationships in what I call a one-dimensional perspective rather than a three-dimensional perspective. Relationships that are healthy enable people to support each other, do things with each other, help each other out, etc., etc. And it's harder to do that when it's just online.
Let's rethink education.
Hello everybody, I will keep this short and sweet, so no need to reach for that skip button. We love making this podcast, and with over 600,000 episodes downloaded to date, it seems like people out there are enjoying it too. In fact, we even hear from people from time to time. It is a labour of love though, with the emphasis on both the love and the labour. Producing each episode involves reading books, carrying out the interviews, obviously editing them, paying for the increasingly bewildering array of tools that keep a show like this running. Most people don't realize, but podcasts like this rely on support from people like yourselves. Right now, we have 27 patrons who help us to keep this show going. If just 1% of our listeners joined them at patreon.com/repod, we could sustainably create even more of these amazing conversations, which I think are increasingly urgent. There are various tiers to choose from with different benefits attached to each tier, starting from as little as the price of a cup of coffee or herbal tea per month. Or if you prefer to make a one-off donation, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/repod. Either way, if you just want to carry on listening, please feel free to do so. And thank you very much for being part of this community. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating for me, because everything you're saying, Sue, and you've said lots across the last 3 or 4 questions, in the current political environment and in the current educational environment at national level, is essentially subversive. And what absolutely, and I celebrate that too. But the question that it leads to is how we stop the schools that you're describing being exceptions and make them typical. Because as you pointed out, we do have the former behaviour czar with his contract renewed under Labour government. That's the situation that we've got. We still have a lot of devotion around the concepts that you talked about: behaviour hubs, silent corridors, zero tolerance, all of these things. Massive push on that. Recent paper in Scotland from enlightened think tank organisation saying, can we be more like England, please? So we've got all of that going on. And politically, we have a government that won't even stand up to Trump in terms of international law breaking, with minor exceptions to that. So we've got a political situation completely inimical to virtually all of the principles that you're capturing within Aspire. And it's enormously to the credit of the schools that you're describing that they're doing things differently. But how do we break out of this? How do we stop these schools being the exceptions?
I think that's an incredibly important question to be asking, David. And it's one that I am exercised by a lot. I mean, as James said, I've probably written in the region of about 25 books, let alone all the chapters and articles and what have you. And sometimes I feel like I'm banging my head against a brick wall and climbing up a precipice with my fingernails. However, I think there are a number of things that I think is worth saying. One is that I think things are slowly changing. I was on the EPA meeting yesterday, and Ellie Costello who's much more linked in with policymakers than I am. She was saying that people are listening, things are beginning to change. The zeitgeist is being addressed at some level, right? So that's one thing. So that sort of gives me some hope. What we're doing about the Love of Learning project is I'm trying to encourage my colleagues at UCL to maybe host a one-day conference in which we will ask as many policymakers, directors of education, etc., as possible, invite all the people who've been involved in this project and see whether or not we can actually get some traction from that. We're also looking at who might possibly be around to endorse it. And I'm not thinking this about academics. I'm thinking about footballers and actors and maybe the Children's Commissioner, somebody who actually has some traction. I think people are talking a different language now, or they're beginning to talk a different language. The other thing, of course, is the big national organizations. The OECD is saying the same things as I'm saying. I'm involved with the Global Citizenship Network, and they are saying the same things as I'm saying. I think that there's and the people in the EPA and James and others, they're all saying very similar things. I mean, the big thing is how we can all, and we tried doing that. I was away at the time and couldn't get there. But there was a day was it Stafford? No, last September, October, where there were a lot of like minds, and I'm a great believer in the power of conversation. The issue is that we need to get that conversation into the media in some ways, and it's there's part of me which thinks I should be knocking on editors' doors, the editors of the Mail on Sunday, and saying that what we're talking about here, all the Aspire principles, are aligned with healthy child development. We want an education system that is aligned with healthy child development, not the opposite. And I will keep banging this drum with as many people as possible for as long as I can. And I know that people overseas are doing it. Estonia is doing it better. Singapore's doing it better. Finland's doing it better. There's a whole load of people who are actually saying we've got to make a change. And I mean, I have to stay optimistic, David, because otherwise you just throw up your hand in horror, wouldn't you?
Well, I'm not offering it as a counsel of despair. Far from it. My current favourite quote is Baldwin's quote about those who say it can't be done are usually interrupted by those actually doing it. And one of the things that I'm trying to do at the moment is to unearth people who are taking action, not just in education, but in communities, through art, through filmmaking, through music making or whatever, and just let them tell their story about what they're doing so that people can see that. But we are, I think there's something really interesting, because you've talked so much about play, and yet the early years guidance in England, in my terms, is written almost entirely in the rear view mirror. So it's fixed somewhere about year 3, looking backwards, asking the question, how do we get children school ready? Our watchword, interestingly, both on right and left, is social mobility, which is the individualized, privatized version of social change. I describe it as the Trojan horse of equality. That, if we focus on getting people out of their class and into another class, we don't change the general situation. And I agree with you. The mechanism for this is to try to make these voices a multitude and hope that it will have an impact. But I would be really interested to know where Ellie's getting her encouragement from, and whether or not it's the current white paper.
Well, that's certainly one of the things she was talking about. I mean, I think the current white paper is very focused on SEND. It's very much about the SEND issues. And, in the schools in which I've been looking at, they certainly had specialised provision, but they also had a very inclusive culture around. And one of the things that I've been taking issue with for a long time as a psychologist is that because of the funding issues, people have been popping labels on kids left, right, and centre, which is actually undermining the sense that we're all different, and normality is a bit of a flexible feast, really. And I think that for me is the power of both inclusion and equity in those principles. I mean, I'd like to know, James, whether or not you feel more optimistic than you did about the fact that there is a reimagining of education, that it is happening, even if it's slowly. I mean, I'm all for transformation rather than reformation, really. I mean, I'd like to see things move quite quickly.
Yeah, we had this on with we had 2 of the reviewers on for the curriculum and assessment review, and they keep using this phrase, like evolution, not revolution, and
That's
everyone's
right.
just saying, like, actually, guys, that's the wrong way around. Like, we're not. This is not an incremental, like, tweak situation. Like, there are lots of people who are suffering very seriously because of the way that the system is currently configured. But, like, I would quite like, if I may, to zoom in onto the school level. Like David was just talking about some big picture stuff there, the wider context, and I'm interested in this thing that like teachers are lovely, like almost always, like just such lovely people, very like generous, generally just like kind, good natured. The very fact that you went into teaching, right? You don't do it for the glory. You do it because you are fundamentally interested in the well-being of other people, like, with almost without exception. And yet, when you zoom into what's happening in schools, people are often making each other's lives a misery, and it's like, it's sort of like, despite their nature, there's something about, and part of that. It's a very complex question, this, but I just wonder what your thoughts are on that, and like, what do you see as the major barriers? So, like we're talking about like how to make it so that these little islands of brilliant practice, like Tina's school at St. Ebbe's and elsewhere. I think that a large part of the answer to that question that David asked, how do we spread this? It's through spoken language. It's through conversation, like you said, Sue. There's this whole theory of diffusion of innovations. How do innovations spread throughout a population? Everett Rogers wrote a brilliant book about that, and the answer is people talking to people about the thing that you're focusing on. And so that's so that's a big part of it. But there's also system level stuff, and there's also just like implementation stuff. This is why I'm so obsessed with implementation science. It's like we kind of know what we need to do, but actually making that happen is the most difficult challenge that we face. So anyway, let me bring it back to this question, this idea that that there are broadly really lovely people who are somehow sort of working within systems where they themselves and other people are really, really stressed out, and often the schools can become quite toxic workplaces. What do you think is going on there?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I've worked in toxic workplaces. It's not nice, and it's very much about the influence and the courage of school leaders. The more I'm in schools, the more I think that that is absolutely central. And it's school leaders who actually know about what emotional literacy is. They know about what it means to care for their staff. They put things in practice. They listen to what other people say, and they give up people opportunities to make those statements. One of the things that Roger Mitchell at Ripple School said last week, he said, you know, I actually thought to myself, I can't remember the actual quote, but he said basically I was going to do wraparound care for my staff, and then anybody who is unhappy about that way of doing things will eventually leave. And I think that mirrors some of the research I did in Australia, in which I sat next to a teacher once and she said, it's all about getting on the same train, going on the same direction. And when there's enough movement in that train, some people will just jump off because they don't want to go in the direction the train is going. But I do think that what's been happening at the political level around teach to the test and the competitive nature of a limited curriculum has fed into that toxicity, because people think that, the research says fairly clearly that parents are as keen for their children to be happy in school as they are to get high marks. And I think that there is a powerful lobby of loud parents who want their children to get A stars for everything, or level 9 or whatever it is now that they're trying to get. And what we need to happen is that our voices need to get louder and longer and broader about what needs to happen. And I would start off by actually saying we need to get school leaders together to talk about what really works and what makes a difference. And it doesn't just make the difference to well-being of everybody. It saves them money in not having to advertise and recruit new staff. It gets them good Ofsteds because they'll get good marks, because if kids want to come to school and teachers want to be there, and there's some sustainability going on, it is all part and parcel of an ecosystemic framework. And I think it's really important that what happens, I don't know how much you know about Bronfenbrenner's ecosystemic model, because I've used it lots and lots. It's really powerful. What happens at the socio-political cultural level filters down, but also what happens at the micro level also filters up. So I think that we are at the situation now where I think that there are a number of places where you can actually say, let's filter up here. But I think we also need to be looking at, and I think that people are beginning, in this country at least, are beginning to say the evidence of what really matters needs to be there rather than a belief. What's actually happened is actually been based in a belief about what works, and it's an erroneous belief. If you if
Yeah.
it's like if you get rid of the American Psychological Association had a task force on zero tolerance policies, and they found that you can get rid of the bad apples, but because the whole system, that increases distrust and poor relationships and control that actually just brings in other bad apples. It doesn't work. You have to do things differently. And I think if the highly respected American Psychological Society are saying that, that's the evidence. But still, people are still saying the belief is we've got to get rid of these bad kids, even though a lot of these bad kids, and very much in inverted commas, are children who've experienced adverse childhood experiences, who've experienced trauma, who actually need not always a completely different approach, but more care, more consideration. In one of the schools, in our Love of Learning project, they have a number of kids who have quite severe trauma experiences, and sometimes those kids kick off and teachers are in the way. And what the school does is that they have spaces where children can throw themselves at walls if they're really being dysregulated. But they also have a system in which there's somebody responsible for that teacher's welfare. There's somebody responsible for looking after any first aid. That teacher is told that they can go and have a coffee somewhere, that somebody else will take their class, that they're actually incorporating that care for teachers. And the teachers themselves are saying, it's not the child that's kicking off, it's what's happened to them. We have to continue to love the child, and I think that it sounds a bit soft, but actually it isn't.
Doesn't it? It's the hardest thing sometimes.
It
Thank you.
isn't.
That's so beautifully put, Sue. And that's a beautiful note. I think we're going to wrap up shortly. Just a couple of things. One from me, and I think one from David. One is like in the interest of spreading good practice, and sometimes it's just like seeing it modeled. It's just like hearing a granular account of what that looks like in practice, and other people can go, "Oh, okay, I can see what we're missing here, what we can do more of or less of, and we can figure out how to turn the needle on that." So just one thing to say is that we're really interested in this very spirit in shining a spotlight on positive practice. I feel like I'm moving much more from critique and from like I liked your example of like pulling problems apart. I have a natural brain that does that, and all you end up with like lots of little bits of problems. And being much more sort of focused on practical solutions. And we've started to have, so we've had Tina on the podcast before, and Claire Wiles from St. Ebbe's, the amazing St. Ebbe's, talking
Lovely.
about their work. And if there are any of these other schools that you're working with who would like to come on the podcast and to share what they do and to spread the word, please put them in touch with us, and we'd love to have them on either individually or possibly as like a little gang of people. But that would be great.
I mean, I really think that the one in Easington Colliery, the one I've just been talking about, I mean, what they're doing there is just, I mean, all of the schools in their own ways. I mean, also Roger Mitchell in Barking and Dagenham. I mean, he's going, he's nearing retirement, so he's sort of handing the baton on to his other senior management team members and going off all across the world. He's going to Zambia next week to talk about what he's doing in his school. So I think he would be thrilled to bits to come on. But there's also other people who've written about the Handbook of Wellbeing and talked about practice, and they're worth actually thinking about. I mean, I do end up meeting or having associations with quite a lot of, really amazing people. And in some ways, that's the best thing about my job. I meet the best of humanity all the time. I mean, how lucky can I be?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that I think the American Psychological Association that you mentioned have gone too far. I mean, I think it's one thing to include the bad apples. I think it's completely a different thing to elect them.
I'm going to take that in the spirit in which it was meant.
Well, and now that we've got Pete Hegseth acting out publicly, I think lots of young people will feel much better about their own behaviour and their devotion to video games. So I think lots of lessons to be learned there. I think there's been some absolutely brilliant points have been made, and one of the things that I just wanted to pick up on before we close down is that the white paper makes a lot of references to the London Challenge and the kind of work that Tim Brighouse did. And the lessons that we've isolated from that are start from schools and communities. And that seems to me to echo your point about build from the bottom. Work to manageable scale, look for improvements that can be made, build an appreciative inquiry rather than critique and fault finding. And through that, find traction, get grip on the ground, move forward from the practice and the reality. Inspire and challenge rather than dictate, which seems to me to be one of the key leadership lessons that you're looking for. It's an idea that I discussed this week with a guy called Nikos Savas about permissive leadership and what that actually meant. And one of the things that I enjoyed so much from the conversation with you today, Sue, is that commitment to being present, to listening and engaging, which you exemplify through your work, but seems to me to be at the core of leadership for change. And finally, the idea of permitting diversity and promoting collaboration. And I think you've really captured these possibilities, and I've been absolutely delighted that you've referenced them into the Education Policy Alliance, which James is very much part of, because it's that collective move forward that we need to rediscover humour, to rediscover humanity, and to build on the strengths that we've got. I'm coming away from today feeling really rather inspired by your contribution.
Thank you, David. Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that and look forward to a further discussion with you.
Yeah, I'd love that. And thank you for all that you're doing as well. I mean, I think I hate this term being on the same page, but it's appropriate here.
Indeed. And I mean, that description of yourself earlier, Sue, is like climbing an edifice, hanging on by your fingernails. It is so impressive what you do. And I remember very clearly the moment that you exploded into my life at the first Rethinking Education conference. And I was running a session, and I think it was my mum who was just like, "You've got to go and talk to this lady. She's amazing." And since then, we've had, I don't know how many conversations we've had. It's in the multiple dozens, I imagine. And you are just so tireless. I think indefatigable is the word that springs to mind. You are just
Nuts.
Relentlessly positive, energetic in the face of, the scale of the challenge that we face, but there's such a force of nature and a force for good in the world. So thank you so much for all that you're doing. All power to your elbow, and I look forward to chatting again soon and to getting back. I've handed over the reins of the EPA for a couple of months while I've been in the writing bunker to the amazing Christina Kottman, our colleague in Brazil, who's doing an amazing job. Maybe stay out of it because she's doing it much better than I was.
Can I just check with you? Is she actually in Brazil?
Yeah, she's in Rio.
Oh, right. I mean, because I'm going to be in Brazil in 2 weeks' time, but I'm going to be in Sao Paulo. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So I'd try and see her if it was possible. Yeah.
She sometimes turns her computer around and you can see Big Jesus right there. She's halfway up the Big Jesus hill, I think. Christ the Redeemer, I think, is the formal name, isn't it? Not Big Jesus. Anyway, yes, thank you very much. It's been lovely to have this conversation, Sue. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your time.